We have Fox Sports and Big Ten Network host and sideline reporter. It is Coley Harvey. Coley, thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Taylor.
All right, so before we get into your ESPN career and covering a multitude of unbelievable things and also at Fox Sports, let's talk about the beginning. Northwestern University, what made you want to go there?
Applying to Northwestern was kind of on a whim. I knew that it was among the better journalism schools in the country, especially at that time. And I just said, hey, see if I can get in. I really didn't think that it was gonna happen. I was kind of preparing myself for other opportunities, and when it did, I was like, all right, hey, we're gonna really get into this journalism thing. That was my goal from the time I was in high school. I guess really when I was about 15 years old is when it really sunk in that I wanted to be a sports journalist. You know, I grew up my whole life watching SportsCenter, watching FS1, or well, not FS1 then, but watching Fox Sports, and just really seeing the anchors and the personalities and the stories that they were able to tell and the places that they were able to go, and just the fact they were around sports. You know, I've always been a sports fan and just someone who's been eager to be part of this industry. So it just made sense that was an area that I want to go into when I got to college. And honestly, once I was in college, I kind of thought I was going to be going the news route. You know, I'm also a very, I love history. I love news, and I pay attention to politics and that kind of thing. So I thought that was going to be the lane that I was going to get into as a news reporter.
Huh.
And the summer between my sophomore year and my junior year, I had an internship, which was with MajorLeagueBaseball.com, MLB.com, and unfortunately, about 2 years ago, they ended up stopping that program, and it was a very influential program for a lot of people who are in sports journalism right now. So I was fortunate to do that, and pretty much ever since then, it's been all sports. I really haven't looked back since then. I know we'll get to some of it later, but yeah, I've had a chance to cover football and baseball and basketball and some hockey, you name it. I've kind of pretty much been around it now, and a lot of that goes back to me being a former baseball player myself, growing up and wanting to play, but having that realization one day that major league career is probably not going to happen. So let me figure out a way to be around baseball and around sports.
Dude, I've had the same exact mindset. I remember when I was in 8th grade, guidance counselor asked me, "What do you want to do?" Because my ninth grade's coming up. It's freshman year of high school, trying to get your act together, whatever your mindset is. And I said the same thing. I think my Major League Baseball career isn't going to pan out, so I'm going to do the second thing closest to it and talk about sports. And I find it so funny that I have like the same exact mindset as you, which is, I think a lot of people have that some sort of mindset like that, where they think like they play sports their whole lives or up till high school, and they say, you know what? This thing's a lot harder than I thought it would be, which is definitely
or like
what
in my
it is.
case, I could run. I had played great defense. I hit okay at times, but I was, I'm a smaller guy. I know, and I know I've had people that see me on TV and then they see me in person. They're like, "Wow, you're a lot smarter than I thought."
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm about 5'10", but I'm still not, 6'5" and
Right.
250 or whatever. So
no Aaron Judge size over here.
No.
Right. So when you were in college, was there a point in time? Was there a story you did, or it was covering some sort of sport that said to yourself, "Oh, I can really do this at the next level"? Because everyone, wants to start doing this, and then they realize it's very hard, and some people just quit without even really trying. So, what was that moment where you're like, "I can do this at the next level"?
I've definitely had friends who ran into that wall.
Too.
I think. Honestly, I think for me it was those opportunities to be in big league clubhouses. I mean, I was one of those rare few, and I feel like within the year or two after I did this that they kind of started to change the program. But I was one of those rare people years ago where I had a chance to do the the MLB.com internship 2 years in a row. So I did it, like I said, going into my junior year and then going into my senior year. 1 year I was in Atlanta. I'm from Atlanta originally, so it was great to live home, and actually worked another job that same summer because I needed money.
Right.
And and then the next summer I was in San Francisco covering the Giants, and that was the year that Barry Bonds ended up passing Babe Ruth. I just missed that home run by about a week or two because of the way that my college schedule fell. But it was still great to be around a major league team again, and I think being able to hold my own, being able to have stories that resonated on the front of MLB.com, and having people. Of course, we didn't have Twitter at that time, but people would email you and various
Right.
things and say, hey, I like the way that you wrote this, or I like that little nugget that you got so-and-so to say. That kind of gave me confidence and let me know, you know what, I'm holding my own. I could really do this full time one day. And I got really fortunate that even amid a very tough economic and even, tough times in the industry as well, amid those times, I was able to get a job straight out of college. And thankfully I've been able to stick ever since.
Before I move on, I didn't know you interned for the Giants at that time. So you were around Bonds. What was that like? And that was also at the time where he wasn't liked like at all by the media. Because one,
Yeah.
he hated the media, and two, nobody liked him because he was so rude all the time. But if you can tell me, like, what was it like being around like the home run champ at the time, at your age too?
It was, it was definitely, as a baseball person, it was definitely cool. I won't lie. Regardless of how you feel about Bonds as a person or performance enhancing drugs, whatever, still to be that close to the greatness of a ball player of that caliber, and just knowing what he was chasing, again, regardless of how you feel about the record and the asterisks and this and that, just knowing what he was chasing, that was cool, especially for a 21-year-old kid or however old I was. I will say that my relationship, or not relationship, but my connection with Bonds is a little bit different than other reporters. And mainly because I was young, I was an intern. I wasn't going to be there the whole year, and it was clear everybody, in the beat corps and even the players, obviously they knew that. But there was one day I just happened to be in a clubhouse, and I had this like key lanyard, I guess you could call it, that was hanging out of my pocket, and it had my fraternity on it. There was a guy who was training Bonds at the time. He was not the trainer that was outlined in the report or anything, but this is a totally different guy. But he just happened to be walking by this day and saw my lanyard, and he was a member of my fraternity. And Bonds saw the instant connection bond that I had with this guy, and it was kind of like, okay, you're okay. I'm not gonna go crazy on you.
Wow.
So I always had a pretty, not that I even needed to talk to Barry all the time, because back then we actually had a reporter who was devoted just to covering Barry Bonds. So really? I didn't have to go to him too often for things, but when I did, for the most part, it was okay. And I think it was just because I had that rapport. And that's one of the things you learn in this business as you continue to go. It's about relationships. It's about finding some way to bridge a gap between a player or a front office person or whomever. And when you have those commonalities, don't say things are easier, but things certainly come a little bit better in some ways.
I totally agree. And there is a benefit for being an inexperienced 21-year-old intern, because they kind of look at you as like, all right, this kid's just trying to get his licks in, right? And I had the same experience. I was 22, right? 23 or 22 when I was with the Twins. Mm-hmm. I was the youngest guy in the room. There's all these polished baseball Hall of Fame writers, and everyone gave me kind of the look like, well, who the hell is this kid and why is he in here? And a lot of the players took a liking to me because I was the clubhouse originally, that roster in 2018, a lot of them were really young. They were like in their mid-20s. So it was nice for me to make that relationship where it wasn't like, I'm not trying to be your friend. I'm trying to be – and I used to just say, what's up? And then I'll walk away. Like I wasn't even going to ask them for questions. And then when I really needed somebody, it was instantly no problem.
They're always there. Yeah,
they're always there. So I'm sure that internship absolutely helped you for your next job, which was Georgia Tech reporter.
Correct. Yeah.
Talk to me about the experience there covering a big time school like that.
Yeah, big time school, which obviously in the last few years has been kind of going through some
Yeah.
growing pains. When I was covering them, the Yellow Jackets were actually pretty good. That first year was the last year under Chan Gailey, and obviously they weren't doing so well, so they fired the coach. And then Paul Johnson comes in with this crazy option offense that you didn't really see at that level of football that often. And and so people didn't really know what to do about it. In fact, I remember when I was trying to learn what the offense was going to be going into the next season, just trying to visualize it before I actually saw games and things. I played NCAA football, the
That's
old video
awesome.
game.
See, that's great.
And I played with his Navy offense, just to figure out exactly what this triple option was going to look like and how the timing of the mesh and the handoff and the pitch, how that all had to work out, reading the ends and the linebackers and that kind of thing. So I was putting myself into being a football player in a weird way. I've never played the game, but certainly having been around it all this time, I can, and being a fan of it, I can appreciate certain things. So that taught me a little bit more of what I was going to see when he fully arrived and took over. And first year was pretty strong, and then the next year they go to the ACC championship, beat Clemson. Of course, this was just before Clemson really became the Clemson we know now.
Right.
And then they lost the Orange Bowl. Yeah, I think they lost that Orange Bowl to Iowa that year. But still, that was a program that was rolling at that point in time. And so it was really cool just to be on the front line of seeing that transition. Coaching changes are never easy to cover, never easy to be around. Honestly, for a beat reporter, they're a headache just because you're trying to track down fact and fiction. You're trying to separate the two. You're trying to talk to as many people as you can to make sure what you're hearing is true, that you're getting the accurate information. And, so coaching changes in general are never fun, but when you get the chance to start something new and to kind of be that person to explain, what some of this all means, I think that was pretty fun. That was one of the coolest things about being around Georgia Tech. Then the basketball program was up and down, but it still kind of had that mystique at that time. They had just been in the national championship, within 3 or 4 years of me, I guess 4 years of me starting to cover that team. So, so Georgia Tech basketball still had a little something there as well. And honestly, that whole experience, I covered the university there for, I guess that was almost 4 years. It's about 3.5 years. And that just taught me how to be a beat reporter. It taught me about forming relationships. It taught me about kind of disseminating what is truly news to share. And sometimes there are things that you put in your back pocket just because they aren't news, or they don't really, they're not going to help tell the story of what this team is really all about. There's things to notice and to, put in the back of your mind, certain details that maybe you can flesh out later on. But that's one of the things about when you're fresh into being a reporter, is that you do sometimes have to figure out, okay, is this really worth telling my audience right now? Is it really newsy enough? Also, is this worth possibly burning a source? That's
right.
Something that you have to balance as well, is maintaining relationships. And sometimes, obviously they're not always going to like what you write. That going in. But there are some things that you got to figure out, as one of my colleagues always puts it, a dance. You've got to figure out how to do that dance. And I felt like that job really allowed me to do that and impacted me in future jobs.
And what's so great about it, we actually touched on before when you were interning with the Giants, you're relatively the same age as these college players.
Yeah.
That must have been, one, cool. 2, so much easier because it's relatable. If it's off the field stuff, it's like, you can, off the record, you can talk about, what they're doing in school, what girls they're dating, whatever, just the small talk just to help you out when the time comes. And then now you leave Georgia Tech, so now you're going to cover a big-time program at Florida State. The Seminoles at the time, and even now, their football team's not great right now, but at that time in 2011 to 2013, they were stacked. So if you can talk about one of your better interviews you did during the time you were covering Florida State?
Some of my better, can't think of a specific interview though that I had. Just moments, I just think about different moments that happened when I was around that team, and yeah, that was right at the beginning of Jimbo Fisher. I missed his first year, which was 2010. I was still at Georgia, covering Georgia Tech then, but in 2011 was his second year, and he started to really get the program rolling. 2012, they really got going, and then obviously in 13 they won a championship, which I actually missed because I left for a new job right at the start of that season, so I didn't cover the championship and everything going on with Jameis Winston. I missed out on that, although that was a story that I knew so much about as far as, who to talk to. And by that point I had become so established on that beat that I knew I would have owned that story had I still been there. But obviously I was gone. And so I kind of helped the person that came in behind me as best I could without giving them everything. But, and sometimes you do that, but one of the things I will say is, as far as memorable moments from that beat is I remember, just speaking about sometimes the people that you work with are not going to like the things that you write and say. And I remember I had reported something that I thought was fairly innocuous. It was about a member of Jimbo Fisher's coaching staff leaving, to take another job. Apparently this guy had not told his family yet that he was leaving, but it was going to happen.
Right.
So it snuck into a story. I really didn't think anything of it. The next day at practice, Jimbo comes yelling at me and screaming and cussing me up and down. And it threw me off because I always had a pretty good rapport with Jimbo. So that really threw me off. And, we talked about it off to the side and that was that. And every other interaction with him, beyond that was perfectly fine. Like I said, we always had a good rapport. It's just, they're going to have to know there are going to be days that, I'm just doing my job. And if they don't agree with what's being written or when it's being written or how it's being written, that's not my fault. Like I said, there are moments when you weigh those options and debate all that. And that was one of those times where the story was there. He was gone, but apparently this guy had not told his family yet, according to Jimbo. And that was why Jimbo was so mad at me. So that was a memorable one. Another just real quick memorable moment from covering the Seminoles was it was spring of 2013. I was still covering the team at the time, spring practice. And for the most part, practices were shut down. I mean, you've been around the Giants. Practices basically shut down after the first 10 minutes of stretching or whatever it is. The media is there for 10 minutes and then it's shut down. Well, there's one day, I guess not very many reporters really came just because they figured, we're not going to see much. And so Jimbo saw a few of us still there and he said, well, if you're here, you can stay for the whole thing. You can watch awesome. The whole thing. And so of course we're like, well, yeah, and we'll see what we see. That was my first time actually seeing Jameis Winston truly as a quarterback, because he had his redshirt freshman year. We didn't really see him in practice because he was redshirt freshman. So he was getting ready to go into what was his, into his next year, which was his redshirt freshman year, I guess officially, but the year that he was starting at quarterback. And I know Jameis is, has not had the track record in the NFL the last couple of years, but that practice, he was so efficient. He was, he's getting the ball out of his hand. He just had this life and this energy, and you just knew, you said, that guy's going to be special. Fast forward a couple months, first game of the year, they're playing Pitt. He goes I think it was 21 consecutive passes to start the game before he threw an incompletion. The only reason it was incomplete is because he had to get rid of it. He had to get the ball out of bounds. The kid was solid. And then, of course, he leads his team to a national championship. So that was just one of those memorable moments, I guess you could say, from when I was on that beat. But I learned a lot in terms of relationship building. Yes, they're college kids. I'm still not that far out of college myself, in a college town. There are certain lines I don't want to cross. So I stayed as far away from campus as I could. I didn't go to the bars and places that they went to, things like that.
Right.
Although I would see players every once in a while at some of the places I would go, but they were stepping out of their element if they were
I'm
there.
sure they were. Last thing about the Seminoles, Jameis Winston, we all know is this larger than life personality, and he's had his fair share of mix ups in college and also in the NFL as well, but notably in college. What was it like covering Jameis becoming this larger than life personality and also becoming this unbelievable college player?
Yeah, well, like that's what I was saying. A lot of the time that I was around him, these things that we later found out had not happened, or we didn't know about at that particular time. And so I didn't see that necessarily. I didn't necessarily see that side of Jameis while I was covering that team. I will say, yeah, he's always been a jokester. I mean, he was cracking jokes like crazy in practice, but it didn't really seem like it was negative. It was one of those kind of teammate. You've been around college sports. He's one of those teammates that just really kind of got everybody laughing. Got everybody loose, got everybody enjoying the doldrum of being in another practice. That was what I saw in the time that I was around him. That being said, you knew that there was a level of maturity that had to come, but in my head then I'm saying, well, he was a true freshman, he'll grow out of it. As time went on, he didn't fully grow out of it. I do believe that he is a totally different person in his maturity. I know some things have still happened even when he's been in the NFL, but I think as far as his maturity, I definitely think that has undergone a revolution here the last couple of years. And I'm hoping for his sake that this stint in New Orleans is going to really get him back on some level of track as well.
I think so too. I mean, you're just sitting behind Drew Brees for the next year or two could absolutely change his mindset from being. I mean, last year he threw 5,000 yards, but had 30 interceptions. So it's
Right.
like he said he couldn't even barely see. He got the LASIK surgery, so
Right.
maybe, which is incredible. I mean, imagine if he had both eyes working at the same time. Could you've thrown for 5,500 yards and had 15 interceptions? Who knows? But
Yeah.
I gotta say, that is definitely a good move for Winston and the Saints. But let's go to the big leagues now. You hit ESPN. Talk about the moment you got the call, your experience going through an audition. I want to know how stressed out you were. Give me the whole scenario because I love these stories.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy because while I was covering Florida State, I had reached out to ESPN for maybe one or two possible jobs. Actually, I think they reached out to me on that one, but it was obviously very mutual. I was doing everything I could to make it work, and unfortunately, that one did not work for me. It came down to myself and a couple of the people who were actually friends of mine, and I was like, fine, let them have it, because I know them. I'm good with that.
Right.
And then a couple months later, they came after me for something else that honestly, it just didn't work for me. It just didn't work. What they were looking for. And that's an important lesson for young journalists too, is even if an entity like an ESPN or a Fox Sports or whomever may be your dream destination comes after you, and they're coming after you with something that you don't think really fits what you can do and what that you can provide, don't be afraid to say no. I know we kind of get nervous, like, oh man, if I say no, they're not going to want to come back.
That's
No,
my
really.
thinking. That's my thinking.
Yeah, no. I mean, it was a tough decision. Don't get me wrong. It was very hard to walk away from that, but I'm going to walk away, but we're going to have a nice, rapport. We're still going to be good. And they were good when I didn't get the job before that. So it was like, let's just maintain this bridge, this flow of communication, and we'll see if it works out. So fast forward maybe a year or a few months. I don't remember exactly the timing of things, but there was an editor at ESPN. He's still there, but in a different capacity now. But he was an editor at ESPN at that time. And they were just getting ready to launch this NFL Nation thing, where they were having a reporter cover all 32 NFL teams. Had never been done before, and that scale and scope and that capacity had never been done at ESPN. Well, the guy that calls me is actually an editor who had been at one of the regional sites in Dallas when they had the ESPN Dallas, ESPN Chicago, ESPN New York, and all that. So he was the editor of ESPN Dallas years before that. And I had been applying to jobs with him, mercilessly for, a couple of years before that, and just never worked out. Well, this guy, turns out, was a big Florida State fan. So as soon as I'm covering the Noles, he's paying attention to everything I'm writing. And
that's awesome.
And as they're doing this NFL Nation gig, he calls me up and says, hey, obviously we've been trying to get you here, but, we want to make sure that we can get a spot for you. Would you be interested? And of course I was like, yeah, explain it all to me. Let's figure this out. And so I never actually auditioned for anything. I did in one of the previous, that previous job I went up for, it didn't work out. I did do a little audition for that. But outside of that, they had no tape on me per se. This was also primarily a writing job that I was going for. But it was just like, let me just get there as a writer, and we will figure out the TV after that. And, so that was covering the Cincinnati Bengals, going to Cincinnati. So I've lived everywhere, as you can tell.
Yeah.
Lived in San Francisco briefly, Atlanta, Tallahassee, Cincinnati, and even a couple more spots. But that was a really cool just moment, the way that all kind of came together to get me there.
And it's funny because like how a lot of college coaches, they start in college, if it's like a coordinator position, and they move to head coach, and then they say, I'm going to go to the NFL now. It's like what you did. You a couple two stops in college football, and then you're moving to the NFL now. You cover the Bengals. What was the experience like when you're covering an actual NFL team? I mean, same aspect, same game, but it's a totally different world covering college sports to the NFL. Talk about the experience there. And then when you've had the opportunity to interview the Bengals, was there guys that you hit along the way that were Georgia Tech guys or Florida State guys that remembered you, which also could have helped you out?
I'm going to back up real quick as you were talking about, that progression that coaches make and all that. From the time of my first job, even through now, I've always kind of thought of my career in the way of, okay, I'm just like a baseball player. I got to take my cuts at this level. I got to take my cuts here. I got to do this. I thought of it as not saying that certain places were the minor leagues, because they weren't. I was at the Macon Telegraph, which was certainly a smaller paper in Georgia, but then I was at the Orlando Sentinel, which is a paper that typically – I mean, gosh, we've had so many people go from the Sentinel to ESPN. Jamel Hill went from the Sentinel to ESPN. Andrea Adelson, who's at ESPN, went from the Sentinel there. There's just so many of us. There's just a paper that kind of propelled a lot of people to that next point of their career. So I'm not saying that to belittle my earlier stops.
I totally get it.
Just, part of the progression. And even now, I'm still thinking that way, that, okay, I haven't gotten to where I want to go. I want to take this step. I want to do this. I want to do that. Same as a ball player who's like, okay, maybe I'm in the majors now, but I want to hit 300 every year. Or I want to be an all-star 3 years in a row. Or I want to be a Hall of Famer. It's thinking along those same lines. So that being said, in Cincinnati, honestly, I thought I had a good rapport with the players and the coaches that I worked with at that time, and even some in the front office. I did actually have one or two. I had a couple of players that came through the Bengals while I was there that I had covered previously. Notably, Michael Johnson, who was a defensive end for the Bengals. He was at Georgia Tech when I covered Georgia Tech. And he remembered me. We ended up having a really good rapport when he was in Cincinnati.
That's awesome.
James Wilder Jr., who was the running back at Florida State when I covered the Noles, he came in as an undrafted free agent, and he didn't really stick very well with the Bengals, just as far as a production standpoint and what they were looking for him to do. But still, he was in the club, he was in the locker room, and that was just somebody else that I had a rapport with that helped. Unfortunately, the Bengals didn't really draft too many players from those two schools while I was there, so that was about the extent. I think there might have been one or two other guys that I kind of overlapped with, but for the most part, that was the extent. I also had been around guys who played at University of Georgia because I had been over there. I'd been in Athens a couple of times while I was working in Georgia. So just at least being familiar with AJ Green and Geno Atkins, that certainly made an impact as well.
So you worked the Bengals for about 3 years, and then you moved to baseball. That's where I recognized you in your career. You were a baseball guy, as I'm now finding out. Was there like a weird transition because you covered football for the last, I don't know, it seems like forever, and then you go to cover baseball? Was it like, were you confused why you're jumping over to baseball? Were you happy that you're jumping over to baseball and not covering football anymore? What was your reaction to that?
Well, so the transition happened a little bit different. Essentially, while I was still covering the Bengals, actually, we're coming up. What is today? Today's the 29th. So we're coming up really close to the anniversary. But it was June 3rd of 2016 when Muhammad Ali passed away. And
that's right. You covered this. That's right. Yes.
And with Ali being from Louisville is 90 miles from Cincinnati. The night that he passed, I was sitting at home. I was actually supposed to drive to Atlanta that weekend just to, be home with family, spend time with my parents. The reason I didn't end up going is because I was playing basketball the day before and got hurt. I think I broke my toe the day before. And
Jeez.
So I was like, a 6-hour drive is not happening. 2 hours maybe, but 6 hours, no. So I end up staying at home in Cincinnati, and late at night I see the news, and actually I don't know if you can see behind me, but this picture right up here, it's a drawing that I got when I was in Charleston. A guy, just a street vendor, had drawn it, and it's Muhammad Ali. Ali has been a hero and an icon of mine for as long as I can remember. I never saw him fight. Obviously, I'm too young. But still, just what he was in the ring and who he is, who he was outside the ring as well, spoke volumes to me. And so, I was kind of hurt for a little bit. I can't lie. When I first heard the news, like, man, I can't. Like, we knew that this was going to happen for years, that it was going to happen, but it still affected me. And so finally, I collected myself, emailed some of my television bosses, and said, "Hey, look, I know I'm not really on the food chain here, but I'm just an hour and a half away. If there's anything I can do to help out this week, let me know. Wow. I know it's going to be crazy." And I think I emailed them at like 1:30, and they got back to me at 2:30 in the morning. And basically they were like, "Yeah, we love that. Can you be there by 8?" And I've not fallen asleep at this point. I'm like, okay.
Oh no. And your toes all screwed up, and you're like all over the place.
Busted.
Yeah. So now you got to stand around for like 15 hours reporting about this tragic news, and you're in pain.
Yeah. So honestly, I thought I was just going to be there maybe Saturday and Sunday, just a couple of days. And I ended up being there the entire week. I was our lead reporter on the ground covering,
that's sick.
Just various stories connected to him, and then the memorial itself on that Friday. Of course, we had other reporters by Friday who were in town, but I began our coverage at the funeral home when the hearse left, and I was at the cemetery when the hearse arrived at the cemetery. So top one memorable experience of my career for sure, that entire week. And that's why, as I see what's going on in Louisville right now, I think about Louisville, just my time there. It's even though I was only there that week, it still is a place that's kind of gotten into my heart. That all being said, pushing that all aside, it was because of that experience that a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call from one of the heads of SportsCenter who said, "Hey, look, we've been talking amongst ourselves here and just realized we haven't really talked to you about this, but how would you feel about being part of the SportsCenter Bureau team?" And that's the team that's comprised of Pedro Gomez and Sal Palantonio and Michelle Steele and all these reporters, Mark Schwartz, all these reporters who you know very well, and I'm like, yeah.
Duh. Yeah.
So I moved to New York for that in 2016 and was a general assignment reporter. So in addition to having covered Ali, this was all television. I wasn't writing it all anymore. I also covered, just certain games, whether it's a certain Yankees game or the lead up to a New York Giants game, or
Right.
I was down in Baltimore for various things. DC, I was in Vegas when the shooting happened in Vegas. I got sent out there for the sports connection to that. So I really enjoyed that role because I had a chance to see a lot, to do a lot. I love to travel, so it was cool to do that. And it was going into the 2018 baseball season when ESPN's Yankees reporter had left for a new job that he is absolutely still killing right now. He's doing an amazing job. But when he left, they were like, hey, look, we've got a Yankees opening. We don't know what we're going to do. It was at the same time that ESPN's president, basically there was a vacuum in that particular position. So they weren't able to really hire from the outside. It's like, hey, Coley, you're in New York. You love baseball. It's the Yankees. What do you think? And, of course, you can't turn it down.
This is crazy how just things are falling. All these things had to work out. It was so many things. And then they're like, hey, you want this Yankees job? Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
And mind you, this was 2017. It just happened. So the Yankees, that 2017 was when they started to kind of come back again,
right.
Obviously,
the baby bombers, right? All these
baby
guys
bombers and the ALCS, which I don't know how we define the ALCS now because of what happened in Houston. But
I don't even get them started. I'm furious still. Yeah.
but yeah, so that was a team that was like, well, this is a team that could win the World Series in 2018, and obviously certainly were built enough to.
Yeah.
And then the 2019 team was even better. So yeah, I was very fortunate to do that. It took me away from some of the other TV opportunities that I had become accustomed to doing. That was certainly an adjustment. That was probably my biggest adjustment, to be honest. When it comes to football, baseball, I mean, I've been playing baseball my entire life. I've been watching it my entire life. Even when I was covering football, I was watching baseball. So, I wasn't concerned about that. I was most concerned about, are the people around me, around this team, are they going to be believing that I can do this job? Because what they're going to see is, this is a guy coming straight out of TV, and he's going to be a writer. This is a guy that, when he was a writer, he was covering football. This is a guy that, honestly, you don't see much of in clubhouses. I mean, I'm an African-American male in sports media, and, who did not play a sport. That's a very, very rare occurrence, and did not play a sport professionally, I should say. And that's a very rare occurrence. And so even that probably had some people like, can this guy really do this? So those were some of the biggest parts of the adjustment for me to prove
that's crazy
that I really belonged there.
Yeah, that must have been an absolutely eye-opening experience. And it's not like it's the Yankees, and everybody's got an ego. Everyone's got this weird personality. And I mean, I'm sure you've interviewed Judge many times, one-on-one, or just a multitude of guys throughout your time there. But I know you covered I want to be correct here, when the big brawl with the Yankees and Red Sox between Tyler Austin and Joe Kelly. Yeah, so you were there, press box, you saw it unfold, and then you had to go in the clubhouse, I'm assuming, just to get the story. What in the hell, like how did that clubhouse feel after that first the fight, and then how did the conversation with Tyler Austin go?
Honestly, it was energized. At that point, because that was the first season and it was still early enough. Granted, I had covered spring training, so I had begun to build up a rapport with certain players through that. But it was still early enough in the year that I think I was just kind of beginning to get into a good groove with Tyler Austin. Definitely before he left, I thought we had a good rapport. I remember seeing him in Minnesota later that year when we had a road trip out to Minnesota, and he saw me stand in the clubhouse. What are you doing here? And he's a Georgia guy too. Us being both being from the Atlanta area. So that was one thing that maybe had that happened a month or two later, I would have had an even tighter bond with him to where I could even gotten different stuff. I don't know. But that being said, yeah, it was certainly an energized clubhouse. That was obviously all any of us wanted to talk about: reporters, players. And the thing about Boston, of course, I was at Fenway Park, and the visitors clubhouse there is, you've heard the stories, but it is very, very tiny. And when you've got Yankees, Red Sox, the media crush in there, it is ridiculous. essentially there, just because it's so tight, they'll bring the player to this one pillar, this one, I guess it's like they've got a clock and a couple of, signs on it or whatever. So it's one little pillar, and everybody kind of swarms around that guy. And so if you're a player going back and forth from the shower or wherever you're trying to change, it could be, you got to wait. Essentially, you got to wait your turn, because it's so compact in there. But that night, Tyler was up front. I think I did ask Tyler that day. I think I asked him that night if he knew that he had punched. It was Carlos Feblis, the first base coach of the Red Sox, because it was just one of those things, like, you're in the moment, you're swinging, you don't know what you're doing. And I think I asked him, was he aware that he had connected with him? And he did kind of look at me like, yeah. I'm just like,
right.
I don't know. I've never been in a major league brawl before, so I feel like, you're just swinging your arms and trying to punch somebody.
Whatever lands.
He said, yeah. He said, yeah, I knew I connected. And I was also kind of surprised he admitted that, because, the fines and things that were going to be coming. But yeah, that was such a memorable night.
Jeez.
And then I actually did have live shots right after that.
I do remember that. Yeah, I watched the clip recently. That's why I was kind of researching some stuff. That's one of the best stories of the Yankees. And I did watch that one live shot you did at the stadium. That must have been incredible. I remember when he came over to the Twins, it was almost like a sign of respect that it was kind of hush-hush, but you kind of knew just from the presence around that, all right, this guy's in our clubhouse. We know if there's any issues, we go to Tyler Austin, he's going to mess up some heads if we need to. That clubhouse of Logan Morrison, too, who is like a huge egotistical guy, a big dude. Lance Lynn, who was not the fan favorite in the clubhouse, but he was also a big personality, too. But it was like, I feel like you have at a roster, you have to have a couple of those guys that are willing to throw hands. Your enforcer, if you will, like a hockey.
Well, that was the most memorable part of that entire fight for me. Forget Joe Kelly and Tyler Austin, but it was the fact that you had Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, and this was the first time that people really had a chance to see them together displaying their strength. And, they are both literally just walking, but pushing the pile back.
Oh, my God, like Aaron Judge stormed in there like a linebacker, but did not even put didn't put a lot of effort into it. No, he shoved, I think, like 3 guys out of the way to kind of break it up. But imagine if Aaron Judge laid contact on somebody. Like, that guy would have been knocked out cold, or Stanton too. Jesus.
And it's so crazy because, knowing both of them away from the field, they're 2 of the nicest guys,
Right.
Always had a pretty decent rapport with Giancarlo, but Aaron, I remember when I left the beat, Aaron was joking about, because of course he knew I was doing college football next. He was joking like, okay, if I see you at a game now, you better come up and say hello to me. That's just the nature that he has.
Right.
So to see him in a moment like that, it is jarring, just because that's not the guy I'm used to seeing.
No.
But you also know the competitor that he is, and the size that he has. You don't want to be anywhere near him in a situation like that.
Dude, I'd be freaking on the other side of the freaking field away from that guy. So the moment comes, it's August of 2019, August 30th to be exact. You announced that you are leaving ESPN and you're going to Fox Sports and Big Ten Network. How hard was it to leave, or was it easy to leave? Because you get the opportunity at ESPN. It's like I don't know if that was your goal or not to work at ESPN as you were a little kid, but for many aspiring journalists, he or she, this is like that's the pinnacle. So,
Yeah.
what was the reason why you left to become a sideline reporter for Fox Sports and Big Ten?
Yeah, it was the toughest thing about leaving. And I know one of my former, now current, again, colleagues, Adam Amin. I know he's going through this
Yeah.
right now
Mm-hmm.
and tweeted about it the other day. Is the people? I mean, I was at ESPN for 6 years, and granted, I was in different roles, so I was kind of working with different groups of people. But for the most part, a lot of the people that I worked with in August of 2019, I had been working with in August of 2013. So I had built up enough of a just close relationships and bonds with
Right.
people that was the toughest thing. Having to walk away from really close friendships in the work sense. Obviously, you're still friends beyond that, but having to leave that was certainly difficult. But no, I mean, it was a case where I'm looking out for my career. And it kind of goes back to the point that I mentioned earlier. ESPN was my goal. I mean, I aspired to be some version of Stuart Scott. Obviously no one's ever going to replicate what he did. And I didn't necessarily want to just be a host. I wanted to be able to do other things. But that being said, a goal of mine as a kid was to get to SportsCenter. And so to be working for SportsCenter, I mean, it was a dream. But it was one of those things where I felt like my career needed to get another jolt. It needed to take another step. And I was so fortunate and so blessed that about a year ago, really, I kind of first started talking a little bit with the kind folks at Fox Sports. And, and then we were able to work something out when my deal was ending at ESPN. And a lot of what I had wanted then was to be doing more on air again. And I wanted to be on the sideline. It was just something that I did once or twice when I was at ESPN several years ago, enjoyed it, and had been trying to get back to doing that, and it just never quite worked out. And Fox was like, look, man, we believe in you. We want to give you this shot. We're going to put you on this crew with Tim Brando and Spencer Tillman. I mean, like, when I heard that, I was just like,
I'm sure
what?
Tim Brando is is a legend. And, the voice alone, you just know who it is when he starts speaking.
Yeah. I always say, when you hear Tim Brando's voice, it's a big game. It's an important occasion. And so to be working with those two guys has been a dream. And when I was leaving too, the goal as well was to do some baseball. Of course, we just haven't had a season yet, so I still don't really even quite know what that's going to look like. But I'm still hopeful that that's going to happen as well. So it just seemed like it was a no-brainer. I mean, it was tough to walk away from covering the Yankees as well, the team that, to me, I legitimately thought from spring training on that team last year was going to end up winning the World Series. It was certainly good enough to have done that. And again, knowing what we know about the situation in Houston, who knows what could have happened.
As a Yankee fan my whole life and playing baseball, look, in college, did we steal signs? The unreal? Absolutely. We don't have the technology to freaking hit trash cans and shit. Like, I'm not doing that. Once that thing unfolded, you're just not even as a Yankee fan, but as like a baseball fan and being in the media, you're just kind of like, this can't be true at all. Like, this can't be real. And then unfortunately it goes that way. But to continue on with Fox Sports and the Big Ten network, Big Ten in 2020, they had 48 guys drafted in the 2020 draft. And you're covering a lot of Big Ten. Talk to me about covering that NFL draft. And I know the SEC had like 63. And we all know SEC every year is going to produce a bunch of talent.
Yeah.
But the Big Ten came out and showed that everybody's like, we got a nice conference too, leading with Chase Young in the number 2 slot. But if you had to say the best player you watched college football-wise in the Big Ten that went on to get drafted, is it Chase Young? Is it pretty obvious, or?
Well, I didn't get a chance to do Ohio State games this year. they were on our A crew a lot this past season. So I didn't do Ohio State, but the best player hands down that I saw this year, and I know he ended up going in the second round. And I know some of that's just the team needs and the way it all shook out in terms of running backs, but Jonathan Taylor, hands down, best player I covered last year. And I would put him in my top 5 of athletes I've ever just been around, talked to, interviewed, that kind of thing. I'll never forget the first time, because we covered 2 Wisconsin games this past year. And, the day before, when you're on the broadcast crew, you have your production meetings with coaches and a couple of players on the teams and that kind of thing. And we're at the facility there in Wisconsin for our first game doing them. And when he meets all of us, myself, Tim, Spencer, our director, Mitch Riggin, and our producer, Jake Jolivet, when he meets all of us, he extends his hand. Now, with these days, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this anymore.
I don't know.
He extends his hand, shakes his hand, looks each of us in our eyes, says, "Hi, Jonathan Taylor, nice to meet you." It sounds the most simple, basic thing in the world, but just that alone lets you know, oh, this is a kid that gets it. He's the ego is aside. He's humble. He's been raised right. He's been taught right, and that's not to go against anybody that doesn't shake your hand. I mean, there's times I meet people I don't always shake their hand, but you could tell that this was a special guy. And then he starts talking, and he's sharing stories, and we're asking this and and asking that. And I remember I was at the Combine for Big Ten Network. So in addition to hosting some for Big Ten Network, that was another part of the reason I wanted to make that move. I've had a chance to be at some events for Big Ten Network, and the most recent was the Combine this past year. And I remember the day that the running backs are in there, as he's walking through, he looks up, sees me, comes over, daps me up, gives me a, "Hey, man, how you doing?" Because he hadn't seen me since the season. And so I just say he has just that genuine spirit. And then, of course, as a running back, I mean, he was a tank. So Indianapolis Colts fans are going to be happy. I think he's going to represent that franchise well. He's also a Jersey guy. I was living in Jersey when I lived in the Northeast. So, I didn't live anywhere near where he was from, but still we were able to bond over that. So that was really cool.
If you had to say, when we do pick up sports, and hopefully, from what we've heard, college football may not be an issue, but we don't know. If you had to say Big Ten team to look out for in 2020, in the 2021 season. Now, look, I'm going to take another sip of my OU glass here.
No, there you go. I kind of glassed at it earlier, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Sooner guy. My dad's from Tulsa. He's been a Sooner fan his whole life. I was going to wear – I was like, should I dress a little nice, or should I wear my Bosworth jersey that's over on the left side of here?
Oh, so, I love it.
Yeah, I've been to Norman, but it's not Big 12. I mean, it's not Big 10. It's not what you're covering, but if you had to cover, you're covering Big 10. So if you had to say team to look out for in the 2020-2021 season that maybe some teams are and some people aren't really noticing.
Well, I got a few teams actually. Well, I will say, with the sideline duties for Fox, we, in addition to Big 10, we do Big 12.
Yeah,
we do Pac-12. We're about to do Mountain West now, obviously, with Mountain West being part of the deal. And so we didn't make it Norman this year, but
you got to go, man. It is so much fun, dude. Oh, I went one time. My 21st birthday gift from my dad. It was like, look, I have 2 cousins that were at OU already. So they were, I think, sophomores or juniors. And they said, Taylor, look, go. I'll pay for your ticket. You stay with your cousin Ryan. I went. I lived the actual college Division I experience of going to the big parties and fraternities and going to a game. And it was Ohio State, Oklahoma.
Oh, my God. It was that one.
Yeah. Baker was playing.
Norman, yeah.
Oh. Yeah, and they got their asses handed to them. But it was like I lived through it. I was in the student section, and it was like the place was rocking. And they just finished the upgrade to the stadium where they added like another 30,000 seats. So it was a record-setting night of the attendance. But, I mean, whenever you get an opportunity to, it's going to be – if it's during the night or during the day, it's going to be rocking. for you?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, especially with Spencer. Spencer being an OU legend.
Right.
I'd love to be on campus with those guys. I remember several years ago when I was covering Florida State. Of course, FSU and Oklahoma had a home and home at one point. I missed the game in Norman. That was the year before I covered FSU, but Oklahoma came to Tallahassee, and that was a Saturday night game. That was a primetime game. That I believe Oklahoma was like maybe number 4 or 5 at the time, and FSU was like maybe 10. They hadn't quite gotten the full respect at that point, but it was an amazing game. LeBron James was tweeting about the game in the middle of it. I mean, that's how you know it was a big deal. And he's an Ohio State guy. Obviously,
Yeah.
he pays attention to Florida State, but he's an Ohio State guy. So I just remembered that experience. Being just realizing how polite and kind Oklahoma fans actually were. I felt like all week they were reading my coverage just to get to know Florida State, and they couldn't have been the nicest people in the world.
That's cool. That's cool.
But at the same time, very passionate, very diehard. Right? And then when I was in New York, I had a chance to cover the Heisman a couple of times.
Oh wow, that's cool.
And so I was there for Baker's year, and I was there for Kyler Murray, and it's just really strange. It just feels like I have this unique attachment to Oklahoma, but I have yet to go to Norman.
Gotta go, man. Whenever you got Fox Sports moves you guys down to Norman, that'd be sick. But yeah, just let me know what. Yeah, what about the Big Ten teams to look out for in the Big Ten for next season?
I would say, probably, obviously, the best teams. Of course, Ohio State's going to be in that conversation. But Wisconsin is a team that is going to be interesting. I'm obviously curious to see what they're going to do now without Jonathan kind of leading things out of the backfield for them. But Wisconsin still seems like a team, especially with that defense, is a team that could be worth paying attention to. Minnesota had such a great year last year. And they obviously lost a lot. They lost key players in their secondary. They lost a couple of key receivers.
I think they had one of the best secondaries in the country last year.
Oh, absolutely.
With the amount of interceptions they had, it was ridiculous. I'm forgetting the one guy's name right now, but he had, I think, he had like 8 picks. It was, and Fleck's done some really good stuff with that defense.
Yeah. So, I don't know how much of last year's success was because of the players that they had last year, but I do believe that PJ Fleck has tapped into something there, and I think his players have certainly bought in. So Minnesota is going to be a team to watch. Penn State, you always have to watch for Penn State. I remember I covered the Cotton Bowl for Big Ten Network this past year, and obviously that was the last thing that Penn State did. And one of the questions that I had for the players and James Franklin is, all right, so what do you do now to make sure that you guys aren't just in a New Year's Six Bowl next year, but you're in the playoff? That had to be the question, because that team was good enough. The only problem was that they ran into some of these other teams down the stretch that were going to the playoff. I
feel like every year they have a tough schedule. They face 3 or 4 teams.
Yeah.
Right. They got to face Ohio State, and I feel like every year Penn State has at least 3 or 4 teams that are a top 10. It's just how it works out. And then they're having a rough time the past couple of years of just trying to get past that New York Six or even get in there.
Now, I'll give you 2 more teams that are going to be just complete under the radar right now. You're going to be like, what? They could have a good year, but I believe that they could be at least competitive, way more competitive than they were this past year, and that's Purdue and Maryland. The reason why I say Purdue is because they had just a slew of injuries that attacked them all year last year, and a lot of the players that got used, in relief, were a lot of younger players. They also didn't have Rondale Moore, their key playmaking threat as a receiver. He was hurt. So they're going to have a lot of key pieces back this coming season. I think Jeff Brom he's starting to figure out exactly how he needs to coach that team. They got a good defensive coordinator now in Bob Diaco, a coordinator that I think his players are going to listen to. And so I think that Purdue is a team that no one's going to be talking about going into the season, but it's a team that you certainly need to pay attention to. And then the other one, like I said, is Maryland. I'm not saying that Maryland's necessarily they may barely qualify for a bowl if they do. It may be that kind of year again, but they got Tua's brother. I think that's going to be a key. They had an insane haul during their recruiting period, so that's going to help them. And Mike Loxley is a very good coach. He's a very good offensive coach. He had his share of injuries at key positions this past season to contend with. So I think that he's going to get this team at least turned around from what they were this past year. Is it a team that necessarily goes bowling this year? Maybe, maybe not. But certainly it's going to be a team that's going to be a lot better. And Illinois, I forget about Illinois. I can't believe I forgot about them. I mean, they had such a great year last year too. Look for Lovie Smith to try to build on that success too.
I mean, Maryland showed signs versus Ohio State, they were competitive.
Syracuse,
Right, and they just keep falling apart. But to end this interview, which I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, I have these kind of rapid fire. They're called rapid fire, but they aren't because you really have to think about it. So I just label them rapid fire questions. I got about 3 or 4. So my first one: favorite bench player in sports history. We're called End of the Bench. We represent the bench squad. We represent the guys that come off the bench, that come up clutch or do their part. I mean, Michael Eve said Nick Young was his, and it was I think it was Nick Young Clippers playoffs. He scored 20 points off the bench to seal a win. But what is your favorite bench player? And then we'll talk about bench moment after that. Maybe both.
Man, that's a really good question. Shoot, I actually just had one too, and now I just lost it. I don't know he wasn't always on the bench, but I know later in his career he was, and he was still winning championships. So I got to go with Robert Horry. I felt especially I believe in San Antonio, he was coming off the bench. LA, I'm pretty sure he was coming off the bench. And I mean, again, this is just off the top of my head. But I mean, his teams are winning championships, and I mean, he's a guy that always hit that clutch 3. Steve Kerr, I mean, Steve Kerr was coming off the bench in those dynasty years with the Bulls and was hitting the key shot at the end of the game there in '96 and '98. Steve Kerr could be, but that's a good question. I hadn't really thought about that. I'm trying to think of a baseball player too that would be really good, and I'm just. I need to think about that.
My favorite baseball one, I would have to say, is Matt Stairs. I mean, he is the king of bench guys coming off the bench, hitting those, extra inning home runs in the postseason or whatever.
He was a great pinch hitter.
Great pitch hitter, right? Yeah. So, but I think the Robert Horry one is great, and so is Steve Kerr. Here's another question for you: if you had to change a sports moment that is either your favorite of yours or just a sports moment in general that you would change the outcome, what would it be?
Oh man, where to begin?
Right.
So I'm an Atlanta native. It's hard to say that I'm necessarily a fan of Atlanta sports now, and it's just because doing this job, you get the blinders on. You become so objective. But the easy one to pick is obviously the Super Bowl a few years ago. I was actually in New England covering the Super Bowl for ESPN. I was there as our, on the ground person in case whatever happened. Right. So I was watching the game at this bar at Gillette, across from Gillette, with nothing but Patriots fans. And obviously I'm not telling anybody. I did, in fact, there were these 2 girls who were standing next to me the whole night. Noticed I wasn't drinking. I wasn't cheering. I looked different than everybody else. Like, dude, what's your deal? They finally asked me by the end of the night. And and I'm like, oh, I'm working, blah, blah, blah. And they're looking at me like, I don't know. I don't believe this guy. So the game gets close. The Falcons are still leading, I believe it, but it's right before the game kind of changes. And they asked me one more time, dude, what's your deal? So I said, well, to be honest, and you can only keep this between us 3.
Oh, no.
I'm from Atlanta, and I am doing my job. But on the inside, I am hoping that the Falcons win. But you cannot tell a soul in here. They were so nice. They were so great.
Oh, they didn't say anything?
They didn't say a word to anybody.
Oh, I thought they would go nuts and start rattling off. We got a Falcon fan over here.
Right. They were good. Like, I had my eye on them to the point that I'm like, they're going to be good. They're not going to say anything. So anyway, fast forward, the game ends, and as soon as the game's over, obviously they're celebrating with people, and then they turn to me and they give me the biggest hug, but very quietly say to my ear, "We're so sorry. Oh, we're so sorry." So that was a great moment that I wish that I could get redone.
That's a good one.
In Atlanta. And I guess the other one would be Kent Herbeck throwing Ron Gant off first base in Game 6 of the 1991 World Series. If that doesn't happen, the Braves possibly quite seriously win the World Series in 91. I know they got it in 95, but they'd have 2 instead of 1, you know?
Correct. The whole Braves dynasty could have been different. All right, so here's one this is my first time asking one of my guests this one. So there's the famous photo, like the Banana Boat crew with LeBron and his boys, right? So if you had to say your Banana Boat crew of people you've worked with, who is on the Banana Boat? So there'd be 3 other people who'd be on your Banana Boat. Who would it be? This is my test subject. This is my test and see if it actually works. So hopefully it does.
Yeah. No, this is really good. I mean, the first person that I think of, and now honestly, I'm having trouble thinking of anybody else beside him. But the first person I think of is my guy Edward Ashoff. He would totally be on that boat with me. We're good friends, and I'm still. There are days now where it still has not hit me yet that he is no longer with us. But such a good reporter. Our lives were very similar. We're very close in age. I'm older than him just by a couple of months, and so our careers were following a very similar path.
Right.
And he was somebody I really enjoyed working with when I was at ESPN. I forget that we actually met originally years ago when I was in Orlando, and he was covering University of Florida. I was covering Florida State, but I got sent to the College World Series that year, and that was where I met him. And so we weren't at ESPN yet, but we, struck up a nice rapport and obviously got closer as the years went on. And so he definitely, he's a friend, so he totally would be on the Banana Boat for sure, cracking a lot of jokes. Trying to think who else would be on there.
You could put even players you've interviewed.
Player. Okay, I could go players too. Okay. Wow. This is a really good question. I would say another guy that I'd put on that list is, I got to go with the Yankee. He's not with the Yankees now, but my guy Cameron Maybin.
Oh yeah, man, I've heard great things, man.
I love talking to Cam. Whether it was before a game or whenever, I love talking to that dude. He really uplifted that clubhouse when he came to that team last year. And he's good at cracking jokes. So Cam would be on there, and man, I could go with another Yankee, but I'm not gonna do that. I got to go with. Man, this is a really good question. I could say Jonathan Taylor too, but no, I'm gonna go with Taylor. Let me give. I have an FSU guy to give some love. Man,
it's tough.
That is really tough. I would say actually this one. I would say this one. This is going to be a really weird one for a lot of people, but Hugh Jackson, who was the former Browns coach, he was the offensive coordinator in Cincinnati when I was there.
Interesting.
And
okay.
He was just, I don't know. He was Hugh. I don't know, man. He's a cool guy. I really enjoyed the time that I spent covering him, and he's pretty upfront. Actually, if I had one more, I'd add Paul Johnson, who's the head coach of Georgia Tech. He is as genuine and honest and upfront of a person as you'll ever meet, and as a reporter, that's really all you could ask for. And he'd smoke a good cigar. I'm not a cigar smoker, but he'd smoke one.
Nice.
Keep
Yeah,
things live. Yeah.
I think it's great. The Hugh Jackson one was a spin. I didn't see that coming because Hugh Jackson might maybe sink the boat. I don't know with his career. I know he's probably a nice guy, but that career of his was
You
tough.
gotta remember Hugh before he went to Cleveland.
Yeah.
2015, the Bengals were awesome, and then Andy Dalton breaks his thumb in the game against the Steelers in Week 15 near the end of the season. But that was a team that went 8-0 to start the year, and a lot of it was his offense. So.
Yeah.
But that's why he got the job in Cleveland, and obviously it didn't work out because it's Cleveland, But yeah, I like Hugh, man. Hugh, I wanted to give a spin, and Hugh was
that was totally a spin. Thanks, Coley. I really appreciate it, man. You're a stand-up guy. I really appreciate you taking the time and talking about the industry and talking about some of your favorite stories as well.
Absolutely, my man. Anytime. I appreciate you having me on.